about 1,000 square kilometers. They don't have any gorillas there. Rwanda has been riding on the gorillas in the volcanoes park in the north, where people now are paying $700 to go and see them for an hour. So there's a bunch of very expensive lodges around the edge of that park, and that's the biggest income earner in the country, is the tourism industry spilling off from the gorillas. So in the south they have sort of a much more eco-diverse rainforest that they've just made into a park. It only has chimpanzees and 12 other primates and 250 kinds of orchids, all this beautiful stuff. And they're ready to start trying to do the same model. Michael Porter's been out to sort of give them some advice on how you can price it up and so on. But right now they still only have 22 tourists a day that come there. So they could do almost anything with it. So you have 22 tourists a day coming, and we did a little calculation for a 5-kilometer border around the park, so all the people who are potential poachers or could be starting fires because they're mining, all the people who could be doing destructive things who need to get benefits from the tourism to feel ownership in this park, there's about 300,000. So go ahead, multiply the number of tourists by 10 or 100. You know, how many people are going to get direct benefits from that tourism activity? So where do we, but from the beginning I was thinking, well, the tourism is an industry where I've seen some of what you're talking about beginning to take hold. People do feel like if they go somewhere, there are a lot of people who would like to be sure that, yes, I'll stay there, but only if I know I'm not going to have a carbon footprint, and only if I know I'm not going to, degrade the species or whatever. So there is a bit of that kind of thinking going on, but how do we take that and let this park go a different direction than the volcanoes park, for example?
I think there's some fundamental questions that are worth asking before you even look at those issues, and that is tourism a smart allocation of focus in the long term? And if you think of climate change and what's going to happen with pricing, etc., I think that it's not a smart move for economies to be based on tourism at any point in moving forward in the next 100 years. On the flip side, I'd say, well, actually, just before that, where did the idea of export-led growth emerge? Well, you could argue it was a long, long time ago, but I would argue that it really came to prominence with the Industrial Revolution and the technologies associated with that, and the value adding from natural resource extraction, etc., and then particularly in the 40s and 50s, Rostow's work, etc., driving the basis for economic growth being an export-led policy, and we saw that in East Asia and the like. And I think that's what the buy-in is in terms of tourism, right? It's that it must be export dollars. I guess I subscribe a little to the dependency theory perhaps there, and say endogenous innovation and endogenous focus is something that is a better long-term strategy in terms of from a risk profile perspective, but also thinking in a third way about development. So the typical approaches throughout the last 70 years have, as far as I can see, fallen into three spaces. The first has been one of missionary. So let's say someone would come in and say, you need the ecotourism park, etc. The second is the capacity building, where someone, very popular in the 90s and today, where someone comes in and listens, and then they find out that the need is an ecotourism park. The third is what I call an asset-based approach to community development or international development, where people either locally or who come from overseas spend time listening, not so they can listen for what the deficiency is, which is the typical approach to international aid development, but actually listening so that they can build rapport and then map assets. What are your passions, knowledge, skills, etc.? And I learned this from people in Kenya. When working with them from Australia, I met people in Kenya and came back, and they taught me about local asset mapping in their western region around Kisumu. And so I would say, to come a long way around to your question, is maybe asking the question of how much of Rwanda's economic growth needs to be based on ecotourism, and how much can the local economies be relocalized if people jump out of the mindset of, hey, we need to draw in dollars from the rich West, and actually look at service provision in terms of mapping. And the internet and mobile phones do incredible things in this space now, a la collaborative consumption. So how much can we do that actually relocalizes just by surveying people about what they're willing to share, etc., that can build economies from the ground up, rather than through an export-led process that has historically in terms of balance of trade and in terms of the unfair playing field, generally seen the inequities rise between countries, not the other way around.
So, could you, last question here.
And this gentleman said his hand.
Okay. So last comment.
I'll try to keep my answers short.
I'll try to keep my question short. And we can do this offline afterwards. So what you've suggested is a number of good ideas, and just imagine there are people who want to connect the dots, doing the internet, using modeling that takes place on the internet, and then they come to physical reality. RISD does this already with Central America.
Sorry, RISD?
RISD, Rhode Island School of Design, which is a short bike ride from here. Tufts University has a thing, a shorter bike ride from here called Positive Deviance Institute, which is the strengths-based. And then you can use the internet to create models and then transmit the model of the problem solving from on-site. They transmit conditions about what they're facing. There's a good dialogue. And then the solutions start to come back in forms of models. And then they have a 3D printer so that things can actually be sent, small scale, and then they can be built up as there continue to be conversations. That's a way to keep people at home. It's also a way to get them invested, because one of the things that we face is there's a shortage of people being emotionally invested. This gets them culturally invested as co-makers of things. And every single problem you've talked about exists here in the United States somewhere and in multiple countries overseas. We just pretend like it doesn't. We don't always look in the mirror. So if you're interested in that, this is going to start in the summer. And by the way, on macro, maybe we just build micro all the way up using truth, and that becomes the new macro.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah. Maybe I can just speak louder. Thanks for a fascinating talk. I actually wanted to take you back, though, in my question to nanotechnology. Because what you've talked about is really interesting and fascinating, and the fact that you're born in 1982 is instructive as well, because I think that the values-based approach comes out of a particular generational perspective. But I wanted you to say something about whether there is anything specific about the technology that has also led you in that direction. Because I think you started out to say that nanoscale leads to the kind of journey that you've taken, and you sort of didn't finish talking about the technology specifically.
Which is why he's here.
I think one of the things is, and I already mentioned it a little bit, is that nanotechnology for me gave me a glimpse of people across disciplines working together for the first time. Now it happens in biotechnology, but it's forced in nanotech. I saw them, they would go down into the lab, and if you were using the scanning tunneling microscope, they'd then have to come out and have a conversation with a biologist about something, if this is the chemist or the physicist. They would collectively meet and thrash out issues in the lunchroom about stuff that when I asked them, they said they hadn't had those sorts of conversations before. And it came down to the fact that it was around equipment. They had to share equipment, and if you have to share equipment, you have to engage with people. And that, I think, is I mean, it sounds like a strange sort of thing to say as one of the most important things, but I think it was. The other is that in nano, you move closer to philosophy when you start to engage with quantum because of the unknown. And I think that's where, again, you'll start to get some really interesting intersections with people talking about what happens at that level. I mean, because a lot of it is based on probability, right? And we still haven't found a way to synthesize Newtonian physics and quantum physics, and that's a very exciting sort of place to be in. And then, of course, the fact that the properties change on the nanoscale. I mean, that's very exciting in many senses when you can actually look at taking a material down and all of a sudden it becomes conductive, or its color changes. I mean, this is not a talk to deny the exciting stuff that is happening and the potential that lies there for nanotechnology. It's more to say, hey, for a long time now, largely men have set an agenda around science which has been very reductionist. And ironically, by reducing things to the level of the nanoscale, you're actually able to start again on a holistic path.
This is an excellent way to really end the presentation, because this is a case where a new class of technologies forces you to think differently about social structures. And nanotechnology is forcing people to really think differently about what is possible and how to think differently about issues like equity, sustainability, that we really never had to think very much about before, because we were confined by the nature of the technology available to us. If the tool that you have to use for your cultivation is a big tractor, that shapes even the way you think about the size of land you can introduce agriculture on. But if you can start to think at a nano level, and we'll hear some of these examples tomorrow, where you can significantly decentralize your production, it gives you a different vision of what the world could actually look like. And so tomorrow we'll really have a chance to work with a country, that small country, 2 million people, that has decided it wants to focus on a specific area of polymers. And so the ideas we've discussed all today, we will have the opportunity to then reflect on how could they be utilized in the context of a country that wants to define a future for itself at a critical moment when you have these new technologies. And then we'll have examples of them. We have a think tank ready, it's going to show up anytime. This person has actually created a company that reduces the cost of desalination of water by, the energy cost of desalination of water by 70%. This is using nanopolymers. He's done it. He has actually, at one point, he brought a prototype to one of my classes, and as he was talking, it was producing clean water, and at the end of it, we both drank it. So really practical. So there are people who are working on this, and then he will also talk to you about the challenges that you face when suddenly you show up in a municipality and you say, you know what, you can recycle all the wastewater, and the municipality looks at you and says, I'm sorry, we make our money selling water. If you start to recycle water, you're going to destroy the municipality. The municipality will have no revenue. And then you suddenly, this is a municipality that has serious problems with water. And that municipality tells you, I don't like this technology because this technology is going to disrupt the way we think about the municipality. It changes the way you think about infrastructure. The second comment I just wanted to make in relation to this really very interesting contribution is Schumpeter had a reputation of not directly responding to his critics. And so people thought he didn't care about his critics, but actually he would respond by writing another paper, but not referring to the person who criticized him. He just writes that paper and publishes it somewhere else. And then it's only later that people saw this clarity of thought and the growth of his own thinking. And in 1932, he wrote a very interesting paper just entitled Development. And it summarizes his basic concepts consolidate them into 3 ideas: novelty, indeterminacy, and the fact that technologies evolve through leaps. But there's one idea in that paper which is very instructive, where he spends quite a bit of time distinguishing between growth and development. This is a part of Schumpeter's thinking that connects with the ecological thinking at the moment, that really needs to be elaborated and developed, where when he used the term development, he used it very deliberately to distinguish it from just accumulation of resources or assets or material or changes in population. He thought about this as a qualitative change in terms of the efficiency of use of resources, which connects very well with the ecological thinking. Today, even though he wasn't thinking of it in ecological terms, the fact that he used that term development as opposed to growth is very instructive. Unfortunately, he wrote that paper as a gift, a birthday gift to a friend of his, and that friend of his moved with this collection of papers. Those are the days when we had real scholars. People gave you a written paper as a birthday present rather than take you to a restaurant and buy you a big meal. And this collection of papers was never published, was sitting in the personal archives of Schumpeter's friend, and got discovered, I believe, in the early 90s or someplace like that, around 1992. Got published finally in 2005 in the economic journal, the Journal of Economic Literature, 2005. And I recommend this paper to everybody, and maybe we can make copies available tomorrow for everybody. It's a brilliant piece of work that bridges basically between the two Schumpeters, the Schumpeter 1912 and Schumpeter book in the 40s. And the people have debated that there are two Schumpeters, Schumpeter Mark I and Schumpeter Mark II. But the reason why we've had two Schumpeters is this important paper that bridges between the two views was never published. Basically got lost. A very interesting aspect of Schumpeter's thinking. The first book, the Theory of Economic Development, was first published with 6 chapters. It had a very long chapter at the end that summarized his theory. Schumpeter had a very interesting way of writing and then having the theory at the end of his analysis, not at the beginning like you do your dissertations these days. And for reasons I don't want to go into, when the book was republished in the 30s, for a variety of political reasons, chapter 6 was excluded. And then the book that ended up being published in English did not have his theoretical foundations, which was the chapter 6 that had been excluded from the first edition when they republished chapter 6 or chapter 7.
Okay, chapter 6.
I think it's chapter 6. And in this chapter, this is a very interesting chapter because it offers basically, it looks at the economy as a system. It's entitled Economy as a Whole. And in that chapter, he also presents a view that his thinking did not just apply to economics, it applied to all other fields of intellectual endeavor, and that's why it ended up being excluded, because he was looking for professorship in economics. They couldn't use a book that includes a chapter that says he has developed a universal theory that explains everything, so it ended up being excluded, and he was being considered for professorship at the University of Bonn. But it's again another aspect of Schumpeter's thinking that has this idea of systems thinking. Much of what we discuss today as emergent properties from systems thinking. Schumpeter anticipated that, but that chapter got excluded. It got rediscovered because the Japanese edition Japan translated the very first book which included chapter 6. So around 1992, when scholars were reviewing the thinking of Schumpeter, a Japanese scholar presented a paper on Schumpeter that included reference to chapter 6. And the English academic said, wait a minute, where is this coming from? Because they had accessed the original book by Schumpeter, which included chapter 6. And that chapter has also been, in fact, published, is now available as a separate separate piece of work. It was, the argument used to exclude it was that it was way too long, but there were political reasons why it was excluded. But the message I just wanted to convey to you is that there is a connection between Donnie's work of when new technologies emerge that force us to think differently about the way society is organized. Schumpeter's own thinking